There's a real us and them thing going on right now over the subject of masking. And honestly, people need to start getting more into the mode of looking for the truth and not looking for validation. Either you're going to allow yourself to be educated about this or you're not.
Right.
And the people who allow themselves to be educated about it are wearing masks. The people who don't want to be educated about it aren't wearing masks. There comes a time when we have to be okay with being made a little bit uncomfortable so that we can learn and so that we can grow. This is a public health crisis. We are being asked to do things that are very simple, that are very easy. And the level of resistance that I'm seeing to this absolutely dumbfounds me. How long do you want to put up with this? How long do you want it to be before things go back to normal? Deny it all you want, it's not going to make the problem go away, and it's not going to make the solution any less effective.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists,
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals,
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
Matthew 25:40, whatsoever you do to the least of these my brothers, you do unto me. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle.
And tonight we are going to be tackling a subject that I have had on my mind quite a lot lately. I mean, to the point where it's really been bringing me down, just seeing the way the world is right now and the way that people deal with certain things, particularly the whole masking thing, has been a real bone of contention for me. Where we live, I don't see it that badly.
No.
I can count three times so far that I've actually, well, four if you want to count. There was one that was more about social distancing than it was about masking.
Yeah.
But only a small handful of times have I seen anything around here that's as noteworthy as the stuff that you see on YouTube. And obviously those are extreme examples too, but there are so many of them and they all pan out the same way.
Right.
And you hear a lot of the same arguments over and over and over again from people. And I started thinking about what the evangelical tie-in was with this. And I'm going to go on record. We're not going to be doing a whole lot of evangelical bashing tonight.
Yeah.
But there is a tie-in. And we're definitely going to get to it as we go along. And I just want to make it clear that we're not going to be zeroing in on one group of people here. We're going to be zeroing in on people in general who have the wrong attitude about this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, if you are refusing to wear a mask in public, you have the wrong attitude. And we're going to take some time tonight and try and explain to you why. Don't want to be very in your face about it, but we also need to make sure that everyone understands, number one, our position is and always has been that masking is a good idea.
Right.
I think that just from the standpoint of other people's comfort levels, it's a good idea, whether you think that it's effective or not. At this point, it's really not a matter of choice. It's a matter of these are the policies that businesses have in place. They have them in place for a reason. And yes, there is a threat out there. And this is our one best and in many cases only defense is to wear these masks. So the simple fact that there are so many people out there that don't want to comply with this has really gotten the best of me. I mean, literally to the point where last night I was up late. I was up very, very late. I was just sitting there looking at the state of the world and just thinking, you know, it's getting bad. It's really getting bad. And it's doing nothing to elevate my mood. It's doing nothing for my anxiety. It's doing nothing for my depression to see where the world is going right now. And I do believe that just as human beings, we have the responsibility to make sure that our world remains safe for everybody to the extent that we can.
Yeah.
I think that as decent human beings, we should care about other people. And as it's been said many times before, we don't wear masks to protect ourselves. We wear masks to protect others. Because any one of us can have this thing and not know it for weeks on end.
Yeah.
Not know it for longer. If you're somebody who carries and is going to be asymptomatic the entire time it's in you, you got to wear a mask. It's really just that simple. Masks do help to curb the spread. And they do say a lot about us as people. The ones that are complying with this versus the ones who aren't, it really does say a lot about what we think about ourselves, about our world, about the people that we come into contact with. It's an important issue, and I want to take some time tonight and maybe help some people understand why some people are so adamant about not. Now, I am not a sympathizer for people who don't wear masks. I think that they're dead wrong.
Yeah.
But I also think that it is important to understand where people are coming from. You don't have to adopt their ideals, you don't have to adopt their principles, but understanding where they're coming from makes it easier to deal with the things that they do. And it helps you make better decisions about how you deal with the things that they do. So with all that in mind, the next verse that I want to bring up is Matthew 12:31, the second half of which says to love your neighbor as yourself. So if we're going to look at this from an evangelical perspective, those two verses are very important. Whatsoever you do to the least of these, my brothers, you do unto me. And that we are supposed to love our neighbor. Who's our neighbor? Not just the person who lives next door. Our neighbor is anyone that we come into contact with day in and day out. So the Bible does get it right in certain key areas, and this is one of them. Mutual respect for each other is an important thing. It's always been an important thing. But in the midst of this crisis, it's even more important because there's real division that's going on out there over this issue, and it is growing. I did see people who had a slight aversion to the whole masking thing early on, but I think that more people were resigned to it in the beginning than they are now. And there are reasons for that too that we're going to get into a little bit later. There's the desensitization that takes place when something goes on for as long as this has gone on. It's already been 6 months. And there are a lot of people out there that are starting to become desensitized to it and are questioning whether or not this is something that they personally need to be concerned about. Well, here's the thing. We all personally need to be concerned about it because even if we live in an area where numbers are low, where they've been historically low, where there is very, very little possibility that you're going to come into contact with COVID-19, it doesn't matter because you don't know where everybody else has been. You don't know who they've been in contact with. And it's just as simple as that. All of those unknowns and all of those variables equal wear a mask. Because who knows? Who knows if the person behind you in line at the grocery store is infected and asymptomatic? There is that. And who knows whether or not you are the one that carried it into that store. So it goes both ways. You wear the mask to protect other people. And yes, right now, it's necessary. It is 1,000% necessary. Now, where does all the aversion come from? Well, by and large, the problem that people have with wearing masks comes from social media, information on social media. Now, I actually saw a really good video on this today from CNBC, which I consider to be a credible source, and they cited all of their own sources, and I was able to go out there and do some research on this and backtrack a lot of the figures that they used and backtrack the sources that they were drawing from. And everything, number one, I found to be very credible. And also, I was able to find the same information in multiple sources that didn't all lead back to the same place.
Yeah.
So that's important. Making sure that the information that you decide to believe is true, is viable, is sound, these things are very important. And I try to do that when I'm putting together the show. If I wind up saying something that's false, then hopefully somebody calls me on it or I figure it out. And there's an example of that we're going to get to a little bit later too, because I'm pretty sure that I made a statement about something regarding this back on probably episode 19, which was the COVID crisis when toxic faith goes viral.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that I actually made a statement that I have since learned is not true. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
One of the things that was brought up in the CNBC video is that we are now in the middle of a social media epidemic where people are getting their news primarily from social media. More than half of the people out there are getting their news primarily from social media. And the problem with that is that anything that you're going to read on social media isn't news because Facebook is not a news outlet. It's a conglomeration of 1.7 billion users and their opinions, and that's it. The other problem with the way that people consume their news and where they get it is that if you are looking to social media for your news and for your information, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it is very difficult to counter. And that misinformation spreads like wildfire. It spreads incredibly quickly. So when new information comes out that counters it, people are a lot more prone to believe the first thing that they hear about this. And when somebody tells them different, all of a sudden there are problems. Well, hey, I read this, or I saw that, or I saw a video on this, or whatever it was. And now all of a sudden they're distrustful of the truth because what they've gotten into their head about this particular issue was wrong, but they didn't know it at the time.
Right.
Because no one really bothers to vet what they learn on social media either.
Right.
Now, if it sounds a little bit out there, I'll usually go to Snopes or I'll go to another source whose entire purpose is to vet this information and let people know whether or not it's true. But even I have been guilty of seeing something where it kind of raised my hackles, or I had some kind of an emotional response to it, and I share it and then find out, no, this isn't the way it is.
Right.
So in those instances, of course, I'm deleting anything that's on my timeline. If I had shared it with the audience for this show, for example, I would be letting them know, hey, you know what, I screwed up with this.
Right.
And, please don't listen to this. Listen to this. This is a credible source, and here's where they got their information from. And that, to me, is the most responsible way of going about it. Well, the most responsible way would be to not post that shit in the first place without knowing what it was.
Yeah.
But once it's out there and it's representing me, then there's not a whole hell of a lot I can do except retract, apologize, whatever needs to happen. But I do my best to make sure that the information that I put out there is sound and accurate. And even I drop the ball. Even I fall into this trap sometimes because something seems credible, and sometimes it can be a little bit of an emotional thing.
Yeah.
And you just sort of, you latch onto it and you run with it. I've learned not to run terribly far, but I've run with stuff that I probably shouldn't in the past. Next thing that I got out of this video, I'm going to have the link to the YouTube video so that you can see it. Once I put together the show notes for this, the link to the video that I'm describing will be there so you can see it for yourself. It's about 20 minutes long, and it's really, really good. They also used a term in that video that I liked a lot, YouTube's misinformation outbreak. Now, this even surprised me. Probably shouldn't have, but it did surprise me to learn that more than a quarter of the videos on YouTube about COVID contain false information. The actual number there is 27.5%. So more than 1 in 4 of the videos that you're watching on COVID on YouTube has false information in it.
Right.
And that information can be very, very hard to differentiate from the truth, especially if it's surrounded by truth.
Right.
Because it may not be the entire video that's off center. It could be just a few details, but those few details are usually the things that people pick up and run with. And that's the problem. The more outrageous something sounds, the more skeptical I'm going to be. But when you present information in a real matter-of-fact way, and you're presenting all the information in the same way, and it all sounds credible, most people are just going to swallow it whole.
Right.
They're going to just accept that this is sound, that it's true 100%, and it's something that they should be taking seriously. But here's the problem. When we were in school, one of the things that was drilled into me before every test that I ever took, especially if it had true-false questions on it, the teacher would always remind us, now, keep in mind that if any part of the statement is false, then the answer to the question is false.
Right.
The whole thing becomes false. So it doesn't matter if somebody puts together a video that's, say, 20 minutes or a half an hour long, and 28 minutes worth of content in that video is sound. It's the 2 minutes that gets hidden in there.
Right.
That is really problematic because people are going to look at it as a whole, and they're going to accept it as a whole. I thought, and again, I was a little bit surprised to learn that there was that much out there. More than a quarter of the information out there is bad. So I did a little bit more digging, and sure enough, came up with 2 or 3 other sources that said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And cited different studies. So you got to know that there's something to that. When you've got that much information, when you got that many sources backing it up, you've got to know that it's real. And it's also very scary because YouTube is a huge platform. The whole flat earth movement, believe it or not, the vast majority of the flat earth movement is the result of a couple of channels on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
The information that people are getting about this and deciding to believe, they are getting from that platform. And what that tells me is that there are a lot of people out there that place a whole lot of credibility on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you still have to be careful. I'm not saying that YouTube is a bad source of information. I watch a lot of YouTube. And I get a lot of information from YouTube. And I've been talking for how many minutes now about a video that I saw on YouTube? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, yeah, I think that YouTube has some great stuff out there. But you also have to be very careful about just believing things without going out and doing the homework yourself.
Right.
But, you know, most people, they're just flat out not willing to do that. They will read something, and if it sounds good to them, they're going to believe it. Again, going back to the life of Pi.
Yeah.
The best story. They're going to believe the best story for what makes them comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that right there is why so much of this bad information propagates. And that's why when you watch videos of people freaking out over putting on masks, they keep making the same arguments over and over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very, very short list of arguments that they make. And we're going to get into some of the things that they say in a little while. But it's very repetitive. And I noticed just a couple of nights ago, we were watching some of these videos, and there were a couple where these were men. A lot of times
Yeah.
they're women arguing about getting into a store. But I'm starting to see more of an upsurge now where the guys are starting to assert a little bit more. And we watched two separate videos.
Yeah.
And heard two separate individuals make the same statements,
Yes.
the same arguments, practically verbatim.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so there's a movement out there now.
Yeah. And I had said that, yeah, I remember seeing these little images pop up on Facebook complaining about the masks because you have a disability. This is what you say. This is what you should threaten them with, you know, and it's all BS.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have a disability because you have asthma.
Right.
You know, there are very few people who cannot wear the mask.
Oh, yeah. No, I have asthma. You have asthma.
I have, yeah. Right now it's on an upswing because of the allergens in the air.
Right. And there are times when I'm wearing my mask for hours out of the day.
Yeah.
And I've never had any problems.
Mm-hmm.
I had more problems in the beginning when I was only wearing it to go into a store.
Yeah.
And I had decided that there were reasons for that I have since learned, no, those weren't the reasons at all. Because I can go for hours in a mask. And I have asthma. And sorry to burst anybody's bubble, but I smoke things that are not marijuana also. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't help. That doesn't help at all.
No.
But I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem wearing a mask for a long period of time. I've kind of learned a few things about how to manage them so that the glasses don't fog up so bad, so that my breath doesn't condensate as much in the mask.
Right.
I've been able to learn a few things about just how to wear them and how to make them a little bit more comfortable while still keeping them safe. Mm-hmm. Because there are plenty of ways that you can deal with those problems that make the mask ineffective. The way that I use the mask is still effective, but I do not find it that uncomfortable anymore. Right. I barely even think about the fact that it's on my face when I have to wear it. And that goes back to something that we were talking about, I think it was just last week, about the whole desensitization thing that happens. So the more this normalizes, the more we just wear the masks because we need to wear the masks, the less it starts to bother us. And I know that I can't speak for everybody, but that's been true for me.
Right.
I had a hard time wearing it for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Now I can wear it for 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even faze me. I barely even think about the fact that it's there. Now, I teased about this a few minutes ago, and I want to get a little bit more into it now. All of us fall for misinformation.
Right.
And I mentioned that I have posted things that I've had to later take down.
Mm-hmm.
The big one for me with the masks was the whole concept of rebreathing your own CO2.
Right.
Now, I thought for a while that the reason why I had such a problem with wearing the mask just for 10, 15 minutes at a time was that I was breathing back my own CO2 and it was doing things to my head. Well, that wasn't it.
No.
It wasn't it because I have since learned that that is not a thing. So what was it that was giving me such trouble? Well, what's giving me such trouble is that I have less control over the things that I do to make the mask more comfortable when I'm just walking around in a store.
Right.
And if it's a little bit warm in the store, if certain conditions aren't optimal, then I'm really going to notice the condensation. I'm going to really notice just where my breath isn't going.
Right.
Because the mask is catching most of it, and that really is the point. So instead of just exhaling and letting that stuff fly the 4 to 6 feet that it's going to fly, it's all staying right there.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I'm rebreathing CO2. No, I'm not rebreathing carbon dioxide. I'm getting fresh air with every breath. It's just that my breath is so much closer to my face on the exhale
Right.
that it feels like I'm taking in the same stuff that I just breathed out. I'm not.
Right. No, you're
I'm
not.
not. The issue that I was having with wearing the masks wasn't that I was rebreathing my own CO2. It was that I thought
Yeah.
I was rebreathing it. That heightened my anxiety,
Yeah.
and that made it exponentially more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't do this. I can't. I'm rebreathing my own CO2. This is not good. This is not good for me. And, see how that escalates. Anyone who has anxiety can relate
Yeah.
to where those thoughts go and how quickly they can go there. Fortunately for me, I'm the type of person, and I've always been this way, where if you can show me where I'm wrong, I'll admit it.
Yeah.
And I'll change the way I think about something. I mean, I was an evangelical for 25 years.
Yeah.
And here we are. So I've always had this willingness to be told that I was wrong, be shown how I'm wrong, and then change the way that I think about it. So in a very short amount of time, I went from blaming these problems on rebreathed CO2 to understanding that this was my emotional reaction to it. I started breathing more heavily. I was more conscious of my breathing. I found it difficult to just quote unquote breathe normally.
Yeah.
So that was all in my head. It was mostly the anxiety
Yeah.
over what the mask was doing to me. Well, the mask wasn't doing anything to me. It was just that it feels different. When you exhale in a mask, it feels different. But all of that CO2 still leaves the mask. The respiratory droplets where the COVID lives are much larger. They're much larger than those CO2 molecules that pass right through.
Right.
So the more you learn about the science of masking and the more you start understanding what's going on with them and what they're actually doing, the easier it is to understand that they are in fact safe. Even if you have asthma, most people with asthma can still use them.
Yes.
There are extreme cases of people who cannot, and that's where face guards come into play.
Mm-hmm.
There are alternatives. People can be in compliance, and they can go out in public and remain in compliance and not spread it if they have it. But what it boils down to is that people are not going to think that rationally about what's happening. They're going to decide that something is a certain way, and regardless of any kind of sound information that you want to present to them, they're still going to believe that they're rebreathing CO2 and that's what's wrong.
Right.
But no. And there are a plethora of other things that people complain about that just are flat out not true about masking. And honestly, it's a matter of education. Either you're going to allow yourself to be educated about this or you're not.
Right.
And the people who allow themselves to be educated about it are wearing masks. The people who don't want to be educated about it aren't wearing masks.
Right.
And yeah, it's a growing movement, and it is having a very polarizing effect. People are getting downright angry about this issue, and they are confronting each other in stores. They're not going through proper channels and dealing through management. Mm-hmm. They are confronting each other about this now. There's a real us and them thing going on right now over the subject of masking. And honestly, people need to start getting more into the mode of looking for the truth and not looking for validation.
Right.
That's the problem. We want the things that we believe to be validated. So we come up with ways to validate them. Well, I feel this way after 10 minutes, therefore I'm right. And I'm rebreathing CO2. No, that's not right. But most people are just going to stand their ground because experience from their standpoint is telling them that they are right.
Yeah.
And at that point, it becomes a lot more difficult to hit them with reason and get them to understand, no, this actually isn't the way that it is. We need to have a discussion about this so that you understand, no. I know my body. I know me, my body, my choice, blah, 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 blah. If you look at the trailer that I made for this show way back, before we even had episode 1, there's a little line in that trailer that says, seek the truth wherever it leads. And that means that there comes a time when we have to be okay with being made a little bit uncomfortable so that we can learn and so that we can grow. I still don't like the masks, but I'm not going to blame them for making my asthma worse when I know that they're not.
No.
It's just that simple. Another thing that was brought up in the video is that Facebook, now we attacked YouTube long enough, let's talk about Facebook. Even with all of the measures that Facebook has in place to try and catch misinformation, they're still not catching most of it.
Right.
The vast majority of it is still just kind of filtering through the cracks and getting onto people's news feeds, and people are just believing it. The worst sources of information on Facebook come from the groups.
Yes.
And more to the point, from the private groups. Groups that are set up to spread information about this, or about anything really, because I'm sorry, the meme groups are rife with this kind of shit too.
Oh, yeah.
But private groups on Facebook are absolutely terrible places to get information. What most people do when they join these groups, they're joining a group because the group has a lot of like-minded people in it.
Yeah.
They already have opinions on this, and they are engaging in what we like to refer to as confirmation bias.
Right.
They're seeking out people who agree with them so that they can see a whole bunch of posts that agree with their position, and that, in their mind, makes them right.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing that we do when we're trying to prove religious points, and then we go out and we find all of these sources of information that are anything but credible. But because you see it in a bunch of different places and a bunch of different people are putting their names on it, all of a sudden it becomes true.
Right.
Well, a lot of those sources don't have any real accountability to any larger body. It's just, this is this guy's opinion and it's in his blog. Well, where did he get it? Well, he probably got it from this other blog that you just found the information on as well. And that guy probably got the information from that third source that you found it. Or maybe he got it from someplace entirely other, like pulled out of his ass. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
But, you know, if it sounds good, people are going to latch onto it. And once they've latched onto something, their need to be right is what takes over there.
Right.
So they join Facebook groups that are full of people that agree with their position. And that validates the position, and it solidifies in their head that they are right. So what are some of the results of this? You start hearing a lot of the same phrases over and over again. Some of the more common phrases that you hear revolve around things like constitutional rights, federal law, it's my choice. I love how the right has now latched onto the my body, my choice thing because it's convenient for them.
Yeah.
But let's look at these just one at a time. The constitutional rights thing, when you ask people, they pull out this phrase and they say, you're violating my constitutional rights. And then you ask them, well, what rights are being violated? And they cannot cite what rights are being violated. And if they do, they're pulling something completely out of thin air, like saying, well, it's a matter of free speech. No, it's not. It's a matter of public health. Yeah, you have free speech, but you still can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, you now have to wear a mask in a crowded store. Mm-hmm. And yelling and screaming about not is the exact same thing. So don't talk to me about free speech. That ain't it.
No.
This is a public health crisis. We are being asked to do things that are very simple, that are very easy. And the level of resistance that I'm seeing to this absolutely dumbfounds me. Because to me, it's a rational thing that any rational person would want to do. No one wants to get sick. And I think about it in terms of people out on the road when they're driving.
Right.
I've seen some pretty stupid shit out on the road in the 30 plus years that I've been driving. But at the end of the day, people don't want to get into accidents. They don't want to intentionally do things
Right.
that are going to be immediately harmful. And yet, you ask them to put on a mask so that other people around them are protected. And all of a sudden, it's not a priority because they don't see the immediate threat. You can't see COVID-19 without a microscope. So because you can't see it, then it's not really a threat. Because you don't know anybody who has it, it's not really a threat. But here's the thing. It's still a threat. Whether you want to look at it that way or not, it is still a threat. It is out there. Almost 200,000 people have died now.
Yeah.
So that, to me, puts the threat level pretty damn high. People talk about their constitutional rights, and then they start hemming and hawing about places violating federal law. Let me make one thing perfectly and abundantly crystal fucking clear to these people, okay? There is no federal law that says that a private establishment has to let anybody in under any circumstance, whether they have a disability or anything else. No, they do not have to let you in.
Right.
It would be the same as the government telling me that I had to take vagrants in off the street and give them someplace to sleep.
Yeah.
No. They cannot tell me that I have to have somebody in my house that I don't want there. That is
Right.
not something that the federal government does or will ever do. I have the choice of who comes into my house. Guess what? That store that you shop at has the choice of serving you or not serving you. There is no federal law that is mandating that you be allowed in because you have asthma.
Right.
No. And as far as the whole my body, my choice thing, you know what? Same thing that I said in the last episode that we did on this. Your liberties end where my nose begins. What about my body? What about my choice? What if I don't choose to have you infect me with this?
Right.
What about that? And these are things that people just don't think about. They don't seem to understand that the things that they do affect the other people around them. As long as they're comfortable, they should be allowed to do what they want.
Right.
And then they pull out all of this shit about constitutional rights and federal laws and things that they know nothing about, that they're parroting from videos that they've watched on YouTube,
Right.
by and large, or things that they're being told in their Facebook groups. But it has no basis in anything factual. And and when you ask them if they can cite the sources for these opinions, they almost never can. And when they do, they're way, way off, and they're applying meaning to things that just isn't there. Another thing that y'all need to remember is that dress codes have been a thing in public places and businesses for a very long time. This is not a new concept. The phrase no shirt, no shoes, no service predates my great-grandfather, for fuck's sake. Okay? Businesses have been imposing certain codes of dress for a long time. There is no federal law that can force a business to let you in just because you don't want to wear a mask.
Right.
Try walking in without shoes. Try walking in without a shirt. People understand that these things are necessary and they just do them. We've been just doing them for ages. I've never heard anyone complain about their liberties being violated because they were asked to wear shoes into Walmart.
No.
But now all of a sudden, this is something that's a little bit uncomfortable. It's new. It's not something that we really want to do. And all of a sudden, it's about our rights and laws and constitutional whatever. No. They don't have to let you in. And you've been dealing with these kinds of policies your entire life.
Yeah.
This is a new one. Hopefully, it's a temporary one. If you comply, it'll be even more temporary. But the more you argue, the more you fight, the more that you push back, the more that you insist on spreading this shit if you have it,
Yeah.
the longer it's going to take for things to normalize again. How long do you want to put up with this? How long do you want this to be a struggle in your life? How long do you want it to be before things go back to normal?
Yeah.
To me, it's so elementary. No, I don't like wearing the mask, but I'm going to wear it until I don't have to anymore.
Right.
Because if I wear it, there will come a point where I won't have to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't, then who knows when I won't have to anymore, or when it will just be a moot point for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
When will it just stop even being an issue? Because I'm not breathing anymore.
Right.
Let's talk about some of the common excuses that people use for not wearing masks. For starters, this is the one that really, really gets my goat. They'll tell you that the numbers are exaggerated, that not as many people as they say are dying of this are dying of it. Now, just because somebody dies and they have other health issues or they have pre-existing conditions, they had things wrong with them before, does not mean that this is not the thing that put the final nail in their coffin.
Right.
Okay? Who knows how much longer they would have lived if they hadn't contracted this thing. So was COVID the only cause of death? No, but it probably exacerbated any other kind of respiratory issue that they had.
Yeah.
And just sped up the process of them dying of that. Mm-hmm. But
a lot of perfectly healthy people, like people who've run marathons and are like, they were like in the prime of life, at their absolute peak of health, have been decimated. Just like
oh yeah,
eradicated their whole lives.
and I don't know what's worse, when it kills you or just destroys your life.
Right.
And there are so many ways that this can destroy your life and leave you to deal with the aftermath.
Right.
It's just so not worth it. And the numbers are not exaggerated.
No.
If COVID was involved, then it's a COVID death, because these people would not likely have died of any of the other things that were wrong with them if this thing hadn't been running interference on those pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
So yes, just because you have something like COPD doesn't mean that it was the COPD that necessarily killed you. The effects of the COPD were exacerbated by this respiratory virus that you picked up. Whether or not you died of symptoms related to COPD or you died of symptoms related to COVID, if it was in you, if the COVID-19 was in you, it's a COVID death. Get over it.
Yeah.
No one is inflating the numbers.
No.
Almost 200,000 people have died of this or of complications that have been brought on by this.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. It's a verifiable fact that you can find in any number of sources. Any number of credible sources will tell you that these numbers look like this and this is why. If you want to be educated as to what goes into a diagnosis of COVID as the cause of death, then that information is out there too. Educate yourselves. Don't just decide that the media is fucking with you, because, there are so many ways that the media fucks with us. This particular issue, there are a lot of sources to go to that don't have anything to do with Fox News or any of the 24-hour news cycle channels.
Yeah.
There are scientific sources, there are medical sources all over the place that will corroborate what you are hearing on the news. And I always recommend, even if it's a news source, that you vet what you hear anyway.
Right.
And that information is, in fact, out there. That one is the one that bugs me the most. But we already talked about the CO2 issue. That was the next thing on the list because it came up in the video. People complain that it fogs their glasses. Well, I need glasses to see, and the mask makes my glasses fog up, so I really can't wear a mask because I need to be able to see, especially when I'm driving. Number one, no one is telling you to wear a mask alone in your car. So you really don't have to worry about whether or not you can see well when you're driving. And if you're driving around with your family and you're there with a bunch of people that you aren't social distancing from as a general rule, why would you have to wear a mask in the car around those people?
Right.
So most of us do not have to wear the mask while we're driving. So that's strike one on the foggy glasses. Strike two, there are ways to wear the mask that minimize or eliminate that. I don't get a whole lot of fogging up anymore. And when I do, I make a little bit of an adjustment to the nose piece, and all of a sudden, I'm breathing fine. I can see fine. Every now and then, I'll get a little bit of a wisp of fog on my glasses that very quickly dissipates. And that's that. I can see perfectly fine wearing a mask, and I wear glasses all the time. So, no. The foggy glasses thing, not really an issue. Depends on how you're wearing the mask. And if you're wearing the mask correctly, most of the time, you can at least work around that well enough to be able to read the labels on the cornflakes, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked about asthma. We talked about anxiety. So that kind of takes care of most of the common excuses. But the thing that really gets me is how people have now weaponized some of these conditions, and they just expect people to agree with them and placate to them and just let them walk around Walmart without a mask. But here's the thing, they're going to get inside Walmart, and someone who's shopping at Walmart is going to get on their case anyway.
Yeah.
So whether they get stopped at the door or harassed as they're doing their shopping, people are going to have things to say. And if you really have anxiety, then I would, as someone who has anxiety,
Yeah.
I know that I want to eliminate as many of those situations as possible.
Yeah.
I want to eliminate as much conflict from the equation as possible. So the best way to eliminate conflict is to not create it by refusing to wear the mask.
Right. Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to me. Well, having something that close to my face really, really bothers me. Oh, I get that. And I sympathize. But when you consider what the alternatives are and what the eventual consequences could be of not, what's going to give you more anxiety? The fact that something's rubbing up against your nose while you're doing your shopping, or the fact that now you're laying in a hospital bed and you don't know whether or not you're going to live or die from this thing?
Yeah.
That to me is more anxiety inducing than the notion of just learning how to deal with the mask. If your anxiety is that bad, if it's that acute and you're having that much of a problem, then my recommendation is to just put it on for a minute or two, get used to how it feels, let your brain start getting those signals,
Yeah.
getting the signal as to what this feels like. You may never like it, but it might not be as threatening after a little while. So wear it for a couple of minutes at home and take it off. Take a couple of nice, deep, cool breaths. Enjoy it. Savor it. And then put the mask back on and try it again. Next time for 5 minutes. Then take it off and appreciate those cool, deep breaths.
Yeah.
Then try it for 10 minutes. And then a little bit longer. And once you've worked up to an amount of time that would be considered normal for you to be inside a store, then it shouldn't be that big of a problem anymore. It will cause more problems. It will make you more anxious. And I know this from experience because this is one of the things that I deal with. You'll be more anxious on the ride to that store knowing that there's going to be a confrontation.
Right.
You'll be more anxious once you're inside the store and now you're convinced, whether it's happening or not, that everyone is looking at you because you're not wearing the mask. Eliminate as many of those triggers from the equation as you can. I mean, to me, that is the most sound way of dealing with this. And I don't want to oversimplify what's going on inside your head. If you have anxiety and it's really acute, I understand that it gets bad. I understand that it can completely shut you down. I get that. But you still have to eat.
Yeah.
And in order to eat, you need to go to a store once in a while. You also have the alternative of using curbside pickup at most stores at this point. You don't have to go inside. And I don't think that a lot of stores insist that you're wearing the mask as long as you stay in your car.
Yeah.
So if it's that big of a deal, there are alternatives. People are trying to accommodate you.
Right.
But if you're that much of a traditionalist and you have to be in that store and it makes you feel more secure picking up your groceries on your own, there's give and take that goes along with that.
Right.
It becomes necessary to start facing a little bit of the anxiety head on and learning how to deal. If you're in therapy, even better. Talk to your therapist about it. But what you don't want to do is get into confrontations with people who are just, then they're at work and having this same conversation for the 80th time today and getting angrier and more frustrated as the day goes by. That's not going to help your anxiety either.
No.
So whatever the issue is, my recommendation is to simply ease into it a little bit or find some alternatives that are going to work better for you. People who have asthma and other respiratory issues, I don't understand why they don't use curbside.
Oh, it's like the easiest thing ever.
Yeah, well, you've been doing this for what, a couple of months now?
Yeah, I switched from going into the store and I was wearing a mask and it was tiring. Plus, I was getting like a whole week's worth of groceries at once. I used to go, and pick stuff up as I needed it. But if I was just going out once a week, I was like pushing a 50-pound cart through the store, and it was exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't doing me any favors being stressed out and having to load everything and pull everything. And
Yeah. I don't like shopping to begin with. And I
Right.
think that might have been most of it with I'm starting to hyperventilate. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not because you're breathing CO2, because you're anxious and you want out.
Yes, and you hate shopping.
Oh, I
It's
hate
like,
shopping.
I hate shopping. I don't mind shopping if I don't have to like deal with people these days. But using the Walmart app to go grocery shopping and just driving up, calling them and saying, "Hey, I'm here for a pickup," and having them bring it out and load it in my car has been like the best gift.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't cost me anything. As long as I'm buying over $35 worth of groceries, it doesn't cost me anything.
That's the best part.
Yes.
They just do it.
And I'm like, we are not sponsored by Walmart. But honestly, the curbside is the best thing.
Yeah, you can look
I've
at it in
discovered.
terms of any number of businesses. It's not just
Yeah.
Walmart that's doing this. Most businesses are offering curbside options at this point.
Yes.
And the way they facilitate it is similar across the board.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not just Walmart. No, we're not plugging them for
No.
any reason. But no, just as a concept, the whole curbside pickup thing has been a really neat outgrowth
Yeah.
of this whole thing. There have been positives to this. And I
Yes.
think this is one of them.
Yeah, and also the possibility of working from home has been it's more accepted now because now we have to.
Yeah.
A lot of places have to do that. And the fact that this has been possible for years now,
Oh, yeah.
and it should be an option for everyone.
A lot of the things that we have right now have been possible for years, but businesses and workplaces haven't wanted to entertain them. Well, now that it's a necessity, they're understanding that it's a good idea
Yeah.
and may or may not continue once this whole crisis is over.
Yeah.
I hope that certain things continue, like curbside pickup, like your ability to continue working from home if that is what you want to do.
Right.
I think that these things have been very, very good. I think that they've taught a lot of people a lot of things about what is possible, what people are capable of, what they can be entrusted with.
Right.
Because I understand it's really iffy. You tell somebody to work from home, how much work are they doing? You treat work time like work time. You sit in that office and you work.
Right.
I know that not everybody is going to handle it that way. But what a lot of major corporations that have adopted this model have been finding out over the last 6 months is that, yes, it can work and it is working and productivity isn't going down and things are getting done. And look at all the overhead that we're saving not having a full office every day.
Right. That's
So there are a lot of positives that have come out of this horrible thing. And I know I don't want to insult people who have lost loved ones as a result of this by saying that this could turn into a positive thing. But certain societal changes that have been dictated by this have been positive for a
Yes.
number of reasons. And we just talked about some, but there are plenty of others. So a lot of times a crisis is going to be the thing that pushes us out of our comfort zone, pushes us out of the nest,
Yeah.
and forces us to do some things that have just been speculative. And we've decided, well, that really won't work very well. Well, now we have to do it, so now we have to make it work.
right.
And that, I think, is what's going on with this in a lot of different ways. A lot of businesses and workplaces are just making it work.
Yeah.
And they're making it work even for people who have various problems like asthma, like anxiety, like any number of things, or just, I don't want to wear a mask, which I'm sorry, a lot of those cases, that's what it boils down to, is that I just flat out don't want to wear a mask. Okay, so if you don't want to wear a mask, then we have these options for you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I think that the retail world is going above and beyond to accommodate people.
Yeah.
And they do not deserve to be abused by people who simply don't want to wear a mask
Right.
inside their establishments.
Right.
And there are other things that people bring up as excuses for why they're not going to wear the masks. And I've seen this one in memes a bunch of times, and I roll my eyes at it every single time I see it. Well, you know what? If I can smell a fart and what that has to pass through, then there's no possible way that that a little cloth mask is doing anything for me. Well, for starters, your farts are gas. We're talking about respiratory droplets that are 100 times larger than any molecule of any chemical that is coming out of your ass. When you exhale, you're exhaling respiratory droplets, and you are hurling them anywhere from 2 to 6 feet away from you, depending on a number of factors. And those respiratory droplets contain the COVID virus. And surrounded by all of that, that virus cannot get through the mask because the droplets are bigger than the weave in the mask. Whereas the gas that you're pushing out of your ass is not. And that's, I've read that so many times. It's like, are people really that ignorant? Did no one actually listen in middle school science class? Because you learn a lot about this type of thing while you're still in school. Or you're taught. Let's put it that way. You're taught these things. Whether or not you learn them is very subjective. But we're taught these things. And the very first time I saw somebody post a meme like that, I felt like my eyes were going to roll right to the back of my head. It's like, are you kidding me? You're comparing apples to particle accelerators here, okay? These are nowhere near the same thing, the same process, the same anything. So no, just because you can smell a fart does not mean that your mask isn't working.
Oh boy.
Okay? No, sorry. And then there's the whole I feel fine, I'm healthy thing. How do you know? How do you know? How many times do you have to be told that you can be a carrier, that you can have this thing and be spreading it all around town and never know? I feel fine is not an excuse for not wearing a mask.
No.
Maybe you do feel fine. I feel fine most of the time. And if I don't feel fine, I'm not going out in public. Fortunately, that hasn't been an issue yet for me. But just because I feel fine doesn't mean that I'm going to defy the rules. And people have it in their head that if they don't feel sick right now, they're not sick. It can take weeks for these symptoms to manifest, and sometimes they never do.
Right.
So I feel fine just doesn't cut it. Let's talk for a second about these exception cards that people keep whipping out. They're supposed to be supplied by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they've got all kinds of credentials all over them. No, someone with Photoshop and an imagination came up with these. And I don't think that there's a single person in this world that I would just want to kick any more than the person who came up with this, because I don't even think that the person who came up with it understood just how viral it was going to go.
Yeah, probably not.
But people are walking around with these cards thinking that they are valid credentials and that all they have to do is flash this card and they can walk into any establishment and not wear a mask. Well, if that was true, then anyone with a computer and a printer would be able to do that and be able to walk around without a mask. How many times do you have to be told that this thing is fake? How many times do you have to see, even on social media, I've seen things that tell you that these things are fake, that you're not going to be able to use them in a store, and that they have absolutely no authority. I keep hearing numbers being thrown around like your business could be subjected to a $75,000 fine or a $10,000 fine or whatever number they want to pull out of their ass at that moment in time. You could be subject to this, that, and the other. They pull numbers out just like people come up with statistics. Fun fact, 98.4% of all statistics are made up right there on the spot.
Yes. And did you just make up that statistic?
I did. See how easy it is?
See how that works?
See how easy it is? And people do the exact same thing when they're talking about the consequences that these businesses could suffer if they don't let them in. No, bullshit. Your card is bullshit and your argument is bullshit. Put on a mask or go home. Or just get back in your car, get on the app, and order your stuff curbside. Those are your options. Pick one. And this last one on my list is, I think it's the second most infuriating one for me. This thing has a 99.5% survival rate. I don't see what the big deal is. Well, the big deal is 200,000 people have already died. There are over 350 million people in this country alone.
Right.
When you look at it in terms of that, and you look at it in terms of 0.5%, that's still an insane number of people who are going to die of this. Just because it doesn't look like it's a high mortality rate doesn't mean that those lives are expendable or
Right.
that you have any cause, reason, or right to fuck with them.
Right.
It's just that simple. Sure, you might survive it, but let's talk about the myriad side effects that are associated with COVID and more that they're learning about every day, because we don't know everything about this yet. We don't. We know that it involved some guy eating an undercooked bat, but the CDC is also saying, but that was only part of it. We
Right.
don't exactly know why this thing is here and why people are getting it. So that being the case, it doesn't matter if you survive it. There are all kinds of bad things that that can happen to you as a result of getting it. Lung scarring, strokes, heart damage, pulmonary embolisms, blood clots, cognitive impairment, and mental health issues that you didn't have before
Yep.
can all crop up as a result of you getting this. The data on what it can do is still very incomplete. Every person out there is at risk, and anyone can contract this, and
Yeah.
anyone can die from it. And with all due respect, part of me would prefer dying from it than enduring half of the stuff on that list.
Oh, yeah.
And for the rest of my life. What didn't make it on that list is the whole thing with taste and smell.
Yeah.
I know people who have had this, who cannot smell anything anymore, who cannot taste their food. You know, to me, that would be a personal hell right there.
Oh, yeah.
To not be able to taste anything anymore.
Yeah.
And there are people who are dealing with that with no clue whether or not this is ever going to come back.
Yeah.
Because we don't know.
Nope.
We just flat out don't know enough about it yet to know what the real long-term effects, what all the real long-term effects could be from it. We've got a short list now, but I expect that list to grow. And I expect the scientific community to learn things about this that are even deadlier than what we think about. How it could possibly kill you not within the first few weeks of when you get it, but what if this stuff just sort of sticks around, lies in wait like a lot of other viruses do, and then somewhere
Yeah.
down the line, you get the real effect from it?
Yeah.
We don't know.
We don't know.
I don't want to spread panic, because I'm not saying that that's a thing that's going to happen with COVID, but it's a thing that a lot of other viruses do.
Like the chickenpox virus.
Yeah,
It can
chickenpox
just
is one.
sit there.
Shingles.
Yeah, it can sit there until you're older, and then you'll get shingles.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of viruses are like that. They lay dormant for a long time, and then when the right chemical conditions exist in the body, that is when they manifest.
Right.
So who knows whether or not you're going to get this and then it'll just go away. We don't know. You could test negative for it, and it can still be there, because there are other viruses that are like that too.
Yeah.
You don't know everything. You may think that you know your body well enough. I feel fine. I feel okay. Well, that's all well and good, but you don't understand how this virus works. And the people who are responsible for studying it and stopping it don't completely know how it works.
Right.
So who are you to say, well, I feel fine, so I don't have to wear a mask? No, it doesn't work that way at all. And there are other reasons why people don't comply with the rules and the mandates and all of that. The reasons revolve around things like just simple rebellion. You know, someone's telling them to do something, and you're not going to tell me what to do. Personality disorders play a huge role in this. People with narcissistic tendencies are among the worst in terms of compliance, because the one thing that goes on in their head throughout all of this is, what has society done for me? Why should I give a fuck whether or not I have this or I give it to somebody else?
Right.
So there's that mentality. And it's not just narcissists, but it's a narcissistic way of thinking. Misinformation and changing information. Well, you know, when this whole thing started, they told us not to wear a mask. And yes, I remember that.
I remember
being told that wearing a mask would probably not be a good idea. But here's the thing. The more we learn about things, the more we understand them, and things change. They weren't wrong based on what they knew. They were wrong based on what they didn't. Well, now we know better. Now we know that 6 foot space between people is crucial. We know that if both of those people within that 6-foot space are wearing the mask, there's almost no way that they're going to spread it to each other.
Right.
And we know that even if they get within 6 feet of each other, if they're both wearing that mask, then there's a very, very, very slim chance of them spreading it to each other. And that chance is so minuscule and it's so remote that it's almost not worth worrying about so long as you are doing what you are supposed to do. And honestly, what are we being asked to do here, people? We're being asked to put on a mask, we're being asked to stay away from each other, and we're being asked to wash our hands once in a while.
Yeah.
It's not difficult.
No, it isn't.
It really is not. There are people out there who are just really, really resistant to change. And that's a lot of people. When you wake up one morning and you're told, now, if you want to go buy your groceries at Walmart, you have to put on a mask, it's going to ruffle a lot of people's feathers. The vast majority will figure out a way to roll with it, but then there's the small number who don't. People who have particularly extroverted personalities are going to be more vocal about their opinions. And the more vocal they are about their opinions, the more resolved they get to those opinions and the more combative they can get over following the rules. And then there's the whole notion that I brought up a little while ago of desensitization. It's been 6 months. I'm well, and I don't know anyone who's gotten sick from this. Do we really need to keep doing this? Well, yes, we do. Because if we don't, then you might get sick, you might know somebody with it, you might give it to them, and who wants to be responsible for that? I don't. So I'm going to wear the mask until they tell me I don't have to anymore, period. Right. It flies in the face of people's sense of normalcy, and there are so many things about this that have shaken us right out of the zone of normal. Yeah. Okay? All of a sudden, we go to the grocery store, and we can only go one way up an aisle. And if that thing that you need is halfway down the aisle, but you're facing the wrong direction, you have to go around and you have to go down that next aisle. I sympathize with people who are elderly, who have physical disabilities. I don't fault them for just going about business as usual when they're in the store. Right. Because if it was me, I have an arthritic ankle. So part of me kind of resents having to take all those extra steps to get the stuff that I need. But the bottom line is that the arthritis is held pretty well at bay by the amount of weed that I smoke.
There you go.
And I can do it. I can walk with a minimal amount of pain, and I can do it, so I do it. But if I see somebody who is obviously infirmed, I'm not going to stand there and bitch at them because they're going the wrong way and the arrow's pointing the other way. But this was a bone of contention for a lot of people at the very beginning. Having to do it in the first place, there was a lot of grumbling, complaining, and swearing in stores. What else changed? We had to wait outside the store because they were only letting a limited number of people in.
Yep.
And when the store was at capacity, you were standing outside waiting. All of these things have completely knocked normal on its ass.
Yeah.
And it's done it in a very, very short amount of time. I sympathize, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not one of the most flexible people I know. But I haven't been asked to do anything so far related to this that I've found so difficult that I had to walk away from a store, that I had to get into an argument with a retail worker over. Nothing. Because I understand what's at stake here. I understand what can happen to me, and I understand what can happen to the people around me. And I don't want to see it happen to any of us. And to me, that's the bottom line. Yes, I will travel the right way down the aisles in the store. Yes, I will maintain 6 feet. Yes, I will wait until I'm called over to the register. I don't care about any of this. What I care about is that it's eventually over and I have my life back.
Yeah.
And I can go to a movie theater without being afraid. And I can go to a restaurant without being afraid. These are the things that really matter to me. Not whether or not I have to go a specific way up an aisle at a grocery store.
Right.
But that actually brings me right to the next point on the list. People resist being controlled. So now they're being told that they must do this. And the fact that they've been told that they must wear shirts and shoes for centuries, I'm pretty sure it can be measured in centuries at this point. When you're being told that you have to wear shirt and shoes to go into a business, that's okay because that was something that was going on when we were born.
Right.
The mask thing, this is brand new, and no, you can't make me do it. Well, yes, we can, because this is private property, and we're going to make the rules whether you like them or not. But people feel like they're being controlled. People feel, I've heard the term muzzle being used to describe the mask. And you know what? I kind of wish that it was, because then I wouldn't have to listen to them bitch.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, it's not a muzzle. It's a little piece of cloth that you're putting over your face so that you're protecting people from things that you may or may not know are wrong with you.
Right.
You know, that's it. Then you've got the idea of personal politics. And there's a real us versus them polarization that's going on in American politics right now. So standing up to this is like standing up to the opposing side.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, that's really what it boils down to. They're going to follow the example of people that they consider to be leaders and authorities, and don't even get me started on our president's attitude toward this, because this is where, in my opinion, a lot of the problems are coming from. And I'm going to talk about that for just a couple of minutes as we go on. But for right now, these last two are the ones that really, really get to me. The willful denial without facts, which is what we've talked about this in depth already, so I'm not going to go into much more detail about it. But it's one thing to sit there and say, well, I don't know about this, or I choose not to believe it. But denying it outright when there is all kinds of evidence out there that tells you that what you're being told is true, it's sound, and the reason why we are asking you to do this is X, and you stand there and just deny it, then I'm sorry, that tells me that you don't have any intention of ever being educated about this, that it's going to be all about you and your comfort, and that's that. Deny it all you want. It's not going to make the problem go away, and it's not going to make the solution any less effective. That's that. This last one, don't even get me started. Death is inevitable. And this is the one that I hear a lot from evangelicals about this, is that God's will is going to be done regardless. So whether I wear a mask or not, if I am meant to die of this, then I'm going to die of it. And just like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I'm sorry, but your life has no grand purpose. There's no one up there calling the shots and deciding what's going to happen to you when. That is completely up to you. And that's why it's a good idea to put on the mask. Because death may be inevitable, but you don't have to speed the process. And it doesn't have to be today.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's inevitable, but can we live first? I'm not asking much. Can we just live first? I made a bunch of other notes on this.
Yeah.
And there's some very, very good stuff that came out of my research. A lot of it is starting to look a little bit more repetitive. So I want to kind of move on and talk a little bit about where the real problems lie here. Now, notice I haven't really taken a whole lot of time pointing fingers at the evangelicals over this one. Even though I see a lot of videos where people come right out and say, well, you know, God's going to protect me from this. I believe in Jesus. Jesus is my protection, blah, blah, blah. And I'm pretty sure that I brought this up a bunch of episodes ago, but not in one on this topic. I think it was in one of our Christians Behaving Badly segments where I told the story about those girls that I ran into in Walmart.
Yeah.
Before there was a mask mandate, actually the day before a mask mandate went into play.
Right.
And I was told point blank that God was going to, this woman told me point blank, God is going to protect me. You know, I have no fear of this. My God is greater. And these things haven't slowed down. They haven't quieted down. They haven't become smaller in number. But I've steered away from that for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I've talked about it on the show before, and it's still a thing. And I think that most people who listen to this show understand that that is the mindset. That's the way that these people think about the situation that we're in, is that God is just going to protect them. Well, we did an entire episode on how God didn't protect a whole bunch of Christians and the bad things that happened to them as a result of God not protecting them. So if you want, go back to episode 19 and listen to that again. We go through a whole bunch of scripture verses that ensure or promise God's protection, and then read news stories about Christians who are dying of COVID.
Yeah.
So that's that entire episode. I'm going to leave that part of it there for you to peruse, and I'm going to let that episode make my point on this particular subject for tonight. We have another problem in this country, and it currently resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. The sheer level of ignorance that has come out of our federal government, and not just from our president. I'm trying hard not to say his name. But the sheer level of ignorance that has come out of this administration and the things that have been done to sabotage our ability to deal with it are absolutely infuriating and frustrating and just mind-blowing as to how it's mind-blowing to me how we have allowed certain things to be done to us over the last 4 years, how we've allowed certain things to happen, how there's so little accountability for the things that have happened, especially surrounding COVID. There have been recent news stories about the way that this president has dealt with things, knowing full well that he wasn't keeping the American people apprised of everything that was known about this. And yet, there are still so many people out there that almost literally look at this guy like he's some kind of god. And it makes no sense to my rational mind when I see what's going on. And you know, I'm in very good company, and I'm glad that I'm in good company. I'm glad that it's not just me that thinks that things are just batshit right now.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I'm among such good company, and that there are so many people out there that have the brains to see this person and the situation that we're in for what it is. But here's the thing. 4 years ago, when our current president was on the campaign trail, he took a platform that had all the earmarks of prosperity doctrine.
Right.
He had a very idyllic opinion of what America would look like after 4 years of his leadership. But what have we gotten? What about America is great? I mean, it wasn't all that great when he showed up.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you want to think about where we live, America is not the greatest nation in the world, and I will refer you directly back to YouTube and just put that phrase. Just type into YouTube, America is not the greatest country in the world, and look for the word newsroom and click on it. And then just listen to that clip, because that was a lot of years ago now. I forget when this show came out, but this clip was added to YouTube 7 years ago, and the clip itself is much older. So the things that are talked about, the things that Jeff Daniels talks about in this clip, have been problems in this country for a long, long time. Not a single one of the things that he lists has become better because we've had this person in the White House. Not a single one. But one thing that has happened is that people, for whatever reason, have rallied around him to the point where I've started hearing in the last couple of years the term the cult of Trump.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't quite sure about it. I wasn't quite sure that it was that severe, but the problem is it is that severe, because there are people out there that look at this individual in such a godlike sort of way that there is no way that you could penetrate the gray matter and get them to understand just how fucked up he is. And I'm sorry, our president is pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
And he's doing a stellar job of fucking up the American experiment right out from under us. And that, to me, is very problematic. And when you've got the leader of the free world standing in front of the entire world and saying, you know, masking up isn't that big of a deal. Well, guess what? Now all of his disciples are going to be storming Walmart and screaming at the staff that they should be allowed in because their God says that they don't have to wear a mask. And that is what this person is to a lot of people out there. And especially people who have evangelical influence or who are evangelicals. There are a lot of evangelicals out there that are regarding him in this way without even realizing that they're edging their own God out in the process.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable the kind of hold that he has over people and the ways that he has managed to make a lot of people think. So we went from a message of prosperity doctrine in 2016 to this kind of, because things are so fucked up now. And I think that people understand that they are, but they keep making excuses for why they are. And for some reason, because this is his work, then it must be somehow good.
Right.
Somehow this must be okay. So now we've got all of this turmoil in this country, all of these things that are going wrong, from COVID-19 to half the country being on fire, to all the other shit that's happened this year that I don't even want to try to call to mind. But people are now in this what do we do next kind of mode. And we've gone from this idyllic prosperity message to one that's more of a strange kind of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
Where all the knowledge that we need to be able to get ourselves out of this mess exists inside the head of this one mentally unstable, deluded individual who barely knows his right hand from his left. But there are a lot of people out there that are looking to him for the answers. And only the great man can bring about the truth. Back then, it was about draining the swamp. And it was about all the externals, all the things that were wrong with our government, all the things that were wrong with the way that we do things. And now it's about the enemy within. But what they don't understand is that the enemy within is something that's been cultivated over the last 4 years. And it begins and ends with their adopted Savior.
Right.
And people just don't seem to understand that. Trump supporters don't vet his words at all. They take them at face value. And have you noticed the whole Trump tweets matter thing? That's been cropping up over the last couple of weeks, just heading into the election. And I think it does actually go back a little bit further. But I'm seeing it a lot more now because we're getting closer to the point where people are going to have to make the decision whether or not they're going to vote for him again or not. And there are people that take this whole business of his tweets to very scary extremes. You know, there are people out there that have made it their life's purpose to analyze the typos and misspellings in his tweets because they're convinced that he's sending messages through his mistakes, that there's hidden meaning in kofefe. Okay, I mean, come on now. In short, they read the stupidity as some kind of code that is, I don't know, going to unlock some higher truths. People spend lots of time analyzing Trump tweets. And it's a small number of people out there. But there are people out there that believe that there's hidden messaging and that they will eventually crack the code. And it will open up some much higher truth and show the world that this guy really is what they think he is. I mean, it's delusional, and it's definitely herd mentality. It's people not thinking for themselves, and there's a little bit more to it that I'm going to get into in a second. In my closing remarks, I have a couple more things to say about that, but I kind of want to move on just a tiny bit here. Ever notice when I try not, honestly, I try not to put myself in front of too much of this, but even I've noticed it. When you see footage from Trump rallies, when he has a political rally, how few people in the audience are actually wearing masks.
Almost none of them.
Almost none of them are wearing masks. So why is that? Why do so few attendees at these events not mask up? The bottom line is that the number one reason for this is that if he says that masking up isn't a big deal, then it's not a big deal. What's said doesn't really matter anywhere near as much as who is saying it. So if their little tin god says that not wearing a mask is okay, not wearing a mask is okay. If he says they'll be safe, they'll be safe. And that's that. People have literally granted this man a level of divinity where they trust him in the exact same way they trust their pastor when their pastor says, this is a safe place. And if by some chance you get it, I'll just heal you from it. It's the exact same thing that's going on here. As a follower of Trump, just like a follower of Christ, you are protected. And whether or not that message comes out in so many words, or if it's just woven into the messaging of everything else he says, the messaging is in there. And that is the way that people are interpreting it. And they believe wholeheartedly that because this person says it's not a big deal, they're safe. Because he knows better than any doctor, any scientist, or anyone who's actually spent 5 minutes doing real research on this. No. this guy knows better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to listen to him because he's our only hope at this point, and he's the only one that can fix what's been broken. He's the one that's broken most of it.
Yeah.
Just try and keep that in mind. And this, of course, mirrors the concept of evangelical enabling, where churches stayed open in the midst of the crisis. Remember, right around Easter, we did that one episode basically telling people, don't go to church this weekend.
Yeah.
It's a bad idea. There were way too many churches that were opening for Easter. And the churches stayed open. Pastors guaranteed the safety of the people that walked through the doors when they had absolutely no way of being able to back that up or make good on it when people actually did get sick. And they did get sick. And people did die.
Yep.
And some pastors got sick. And some pastors died. So where's the protection there? One thing that I found interesting in doing research for this, and even in past episodes where we've talked about this, I thought for a long time that the scales tipped way further in the direction of evangelicals when it came to this kind of thinking. But the truth of the matter is that it really doesn't. There aren't really more evangelicals out there than other people groups who are COVID deniers, who are anti-maskers, or anything like that. The numbers kind of line up pretty close within evangelical circles with every other people group out there, which I found to be very, very interesting. But here's the problem. Here's the problem as I see it. In terms of those other people groups, the evangelicals have and have always had a much larger voice. And that's a big problem. They also have voting power. And who are they voting for?
Yep.
You see, we got to think about these things. I'm not going to attack the evangelicals for perpetuating anything about anti-masking or perpetuating anything about COVID denial or anything like that, because they're just in there with the soup with everybody else. They have different reasons for believing what they believe. On the secular front, it's more about freedom and liberty. On the evangelical front, it's about divine protection. But the opinions are still the same across the board. And there isn't a considerably larger number of evangelicals out there that are anti-maskers than, say, and just name any secular group you want to think of. And that right there is why their opinions are dangerous. They have a lot of voting power and they have a lot of influence. So I've been hearing for at least the last 20 years that if evangelicals vote, they determine the election. That goes right back. It was a quote from Jesus Camp, actually.
Oh, yeah.
First time that I heard that.
Yeah.
If evangelicals vote, they determine the outcome of the election. So in the midst of a global crisis, what can the average evangelical do to help? Let's go right back to our key verses here. What can evangelicals do to the least of these, their brethren, so that it mirrors what they would do if it was Jesus standing in front of them? What can evangelicals do to prove that they love their neighbor as themselves? Well, these are my thoughts on that. For starters, you need to decide what the decision to mask or not mask is based on. Is it based on some pointless resolve you've developed watching YouTube videos that may or may not be delivering factual information? Because guess what? More than 1 out of 4 do not deliver factual information. Or is it based on your biblical mandate to look out for other people? If you wouldn't perform actions that could hurt or kill people you actually love, then don't perform them around anyone your faith mandates that you also love. Remember, you've been told by your Savior directly to love your neighbor as yourself. You've been told not to kill anyone, and that means not killing either directly or passively. If you have this virus, don't know, and spread it to others, you are a potential murderer. Period. End of story. Where does that fit into your gospel of love, peace, and freedom exactly? Next, you can simply show the love of your Savior by complying when you're asked to mask up, irrespective of your personal opinions, comfort, or reasons you give yourself for not. Are you interested in sharing God's love? Or will you instead approach people with lovelessness and reveal yourself to truly be nothing more than the annoying clanging gong or tinkling cymbal that Paul warns against in 1 Corinthians 13? Because that is all you reveal yourself to be by arguing with, insulting, and berating retail workers and others who politely ask for your cooperation. Next, you can stand up to pastors and church leaders who preach messaging that includes unkeepable promises of safety and healing, and stop allowing your thoughts to be influenced by people who think it's okay to defy what we know to be true about this virus and how it spreads. Do your research on how effective prayer and healing actually are. Episode 19 of this podcast is a good place to start. Take your spiritual cues from leaders who rightly teach the importance of looking out for yourself and those around you. Good luck, by the way, in finding an evangelical community that fits this description. While I won't say it doesn't exist, I will say that it's rare. And if that's true, should you even be bothering to associate with people who are okay with you exposing yourself to a deadly virus just so they can attempt to prove the power of a deity to save you? Finally, you can vote people out of power who lie, hide information, and set poor examples. Forget that you're supposed to vote Republican because you're an evangelical, and for once, listen to your own conscience. Don't let politicians like Donald Trump influence whether or not you or your family are ever exposed to this thing. Elect representatives with an interest in working with experts in the fields of science and medicine, and who will vote to fund necessary programs that can spot problems like COVID before they grow to this degree, as opposed to dismantling them. But since just a small percentage of evangelicals are likely to do any of the above, here's what the rest of us can do. For starters, thank people for wearing masks, especially if they're initially non-compliant. Make sure that they understand that you appreciate them ripping themselves out of their comfort zone for the 10 minutes they're going to be in that store. Do not confront people. Speak to store management about your concerns. The reason they aren't wearing a mask is by and large because they believe it threatens their freedom. Threatening it further will not bring about compliance or change their views. A passive response to this really is best. And another video that I saw a couple of nights ago that I really liked, there was a guy that was ranting and raving about his rights. He's got a full cart worth of groceries. He's been walking around the store and people have been trying to tell him that he's not going to be served without a mask. And he makes it all the way up to the registers, and everyone just basically turns to stone. The cashier won't ring the items. There are managers, supervisors, other workers that are just standing there, and it's like they're stone statues. And he keeps ranting, and he keeps ranting, and he keeps asking the same questions over and over again. Are you not going to check me out? Are you not going to let me just buy the food that I need to live? Are you not going to do this? Are you not going to do that? Well, you know what? Here's your answer. They're standing there stone still and not helping you. No, they do not intend to serve you until you comply. Passivity and non-confrontation in that instance worked really well, and I think that in a vast majority of situations it does. The next thing we need to do is simply allow people to have their opinions and let the businesses that they're attempting to do business with deal with their policies and decide whether or not they want to allow this person to be non-compliant. In 99.9% of cases, the answer is going to be no, but that is not up to you. It is up to the people who own the business because it's their house, not yours. Another thing that we can do is simply mask up and shut up. It's not about anyone controlling us. It's about us controlling our own futures and those of others and making sure the quality of our future lives remains as high as possible for as long as possible. It's about all of us getting back to enjoying life the way we used to sooner as opposed to much, much later, surrounded by family and friends, enjoying things that we've largely taken for granted up until now. It's about making the constant statement that I care about you even though I don't know you, and I think you deserve to have a good, long, pain and disease-free life to as much of an extent as I can facilitate that for you, because that is the very definition of loving your neighbor as yourself. We all want the same things, so let's just simply make sure we do what we can to help as many people as possible have those things and enjoy them. Next, we can be tolerant and vocal at the same time. If you're in a store and someone isn't wearing a mask, keep your distance and keep your mask on. Let the store enforce or not enforce good public health practices and simply stop shopping in places that don't. Do be vocal to management about your concerns, but don't pour gasoline on the fire by confronting individuals. It won't help at all. It will only firm their resolve and make their case feel more righteous and justified inside their own heads. Finally, we too can and should vote. We have the power to fix a lot of things that are broken surrounding this, and it starts by removing the negative influences that currently plague our federal government and stand in the way of people getting well. All of these things together have the potential to bring about the kind of change our society needs right now. There's a lot of anger, pain, suffering, and hurt in this world, and especially in this country at this moment in time. If we simply resolve to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, all the advice I just gave should be simple common sense, and we should all want to follow it. What's being asked of us is small, but the effect of complying just for a little while could be great. Be the example that the anti-maskers and COVID deniers need set for them. Show them what love your neighbor really looks like. Show them how easy it is to just live the message of their own holy book. These light afflictions to our personal comfort precede greater long-term rewards. And I perceive that my present sufferings, or as I like to refer to them, minor temporary irritations and dislike of wearing masks and social distancing, cannot even compare to the concerts, festivals, dinners out, movie nights, dates, and family gatherings that await us. Understanding that and living the way they should in front of them puts the pressure on evangelicals to live what they believe. But more importantly, it shows what love and respect for our fellow human beings really are and what those things look like in a life that's lived unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.